Welcome to the Duality podcast, where we discuss all things health and wellness from a professional perspective, understanding the dualistic nature of life.
Today we'll be discussing burnout in work versus burnout in fitness, spotting the overlap. This is something I think we've both been through, both work burnout and fitness burnout. Maybe let's start with defining just what some of the characteristics are so that our viewers can actually spot them in their personal lives. What do you spot as some of the characteristics?
Well, pain. So when I was competing as a wushu national athlete, I was training probably 3 hours a day, and the problem is that when you're doing a particular sport and you don't cross-train to balance out the imbalances that the sport causes, you land up with postural issues or chronic pains and things like that. And having scoliosis myself, one of the difficulties I had is that my back was in constant pain. So Kung Fu and Wushu is very frontal focused. Everything is very, like, your hands are forward all the time, so you land up with very rolled forward. It's the same with boxing, it's the same with Sanshao, which is Chinese kickboxing. You're rolling very far forward to defend yourself, and as a result, like, your back can sometimes get sore if you don't do back training. Yeah. And unfortunately, we were quite uninformed. This was like, gosh, how many years ago was this? This is like more than 10 years, 12, 13 years ago. And so obviously information wasn't always as freely available. And so we didn't really know much about postural issues, and we just thought, oh, training is training, We didn't realize that we had to be intentional about, the type of training that we were doing to ensure that we stayed healthy. And so I landed up burning myself out in terms of workouts, and constantly back was sore, and I was constantly having to get like massages and all sorts of things to just try and counterbalance the problems I was having with my back. So that's how I experienced kind of burnout in terms of my physical training, because I was doing improper training. Yeah. And in the same way, like, work, I found myself burning out not too long ago, actually, because I was taking on too much myself. I'm a little bit of a control freak, and so what I would do is I would land up taking on a lot of the work, and then as a result I wasn't keeping up, and because I wasn't keeping up, I was unable to delegate the work, because when you're delegating you need longer lead times. Yeah. And then I'd land up, just burning myself out, and landing up working and sitting for prolonged periods of time. And again, because I also have scoliosis, sitting for prolonged periods of time is not a good idea. And landing up again with back pain that I had to deal with, and landed up using the foam roller and abusing the foam roller. And it was like a toxic cycle of, I just got to get through this, so I'm going to work really hard, and then I'll foam roll my back and stretch, and then I'll be fine. And it wasn't, and then that period of being well after the stretch gets shorter and shorter and shorter. Yeah. So that's kind of how I relate to the topic, and that for me, it's very much pain related.
Yeah, I mean, similarly for me, I think I find, so I know we were going to discuss the symptoms, but for me, I think you've also touched on sort of like the root cause for you. So for me, my symptoms were chronic fatigue, and as we discussed in the very first podcast, I was hospitalized twice because I refused to just accept that I had something going on. And I just continually would do more than I should, similar to you, but it wasn't so much from a controls point of view, it was more so on myself. I consistently said to myself, it'll be done soon, don't stress. it'll be done soon. It'll get
Project,
easier later. And then by the time things get easier, you kind of get bored, so you take on something new, and then it continually creates this ever-flowing idea of yourself that you can take on more no matter how much you've got going on. And so finding the balance, which I think is the root cause for you as well, between the two extremes of, yes, it's okay to sometimes do more work, but you've got to find the time to, again, recover and grow.
Yeah.
And then from my point of view, in terms of the chronic fatigue, it often leads to compensations, not necessarily just in your body like yours were, but also in just your habits. So for me, what I would then go and do is I would notice that I'm not taking the time to be social, and then I'd go clubbing on any day that ended in Y. And I was out until like 2 basically every morning. And that's obviously not healthy, especially when you're then trying to do everything right. So still trying to go to the gym in the morning before going to work, which then burns the candle from both ends, and just it's too much for the body to handle. And so for me, I think both of us have experienced it in different ways, but the cure for both of us has been very similar in that every time we find ourselves in that position, and that's something else I want to point out, it's never going to go away. You're always going to find yourself in a new situation where you have to recognize that you're out of balance and out of synchronicity with yourself. Because if we don't take the time, like we mentioned, to retrospect and to recover, it's very difficult to see that you are actually in this position.
It's a pattern.
And the unfortunate nature of people in general, especially people who are trying to build something, is that building something takes effort. And so whether that be in fitness or in work, you're in for a little bit more work every now and then.
And you need to be out of your comfort zone, but there's a boundary.
And there should be, and that's the other thing. For instance, when you look at your VO2 max, the reason you know and understand where your VO2 max is in sport is so that you know what your upper threshold can be at that 85% marker. And so a lot of athletes will have like a tracker on their watch that beeps when their heart rate reaches that 85% to kind of say like, hey, back off a bit. And sometimes I feel like it's important to have your little heart rate tracker in the work life as well, where it's kind of like, listen, you're doing really well,
but you've been sitting for 12 hours.
You need to back off a little bit, and just so that you don't burn out. And I think that that's something that, for me, my utilization of that is variance. So for me, I have variance in my workday, and I'm lucky with that. So I'm never hyperfixated on one specific task like I know you do sometimes. So for me, it's very easy for me to quickly go take the 5 minutes to recover at work. But then when it comes to my training, I tend to rush it because I don't have a lot of time. So then I'll go and do a 45-minute session to try and get in 2 hours worth of exercise. And then I walk funny for a week and a half. As you know, like I'm still struggling with my adductors after a leg session I did 2 weeks ago. Because I just overdid it in that session, thinking I would get more out of it if I go really heavy from the start. And it's just not helping me whatsoever. So, and I think that's something else that we can maybe recognize is spotting burnout it's important to do early. So recognizing, I'm feeling a symptom, let me just quickly see what's happening. So for me, the fact that I push myself to a point where I'm stretching every 10 minutes and it's not going away after 2 weeks. I've overdone it, it's time now for me to just take a chill pill, relax a little bit, maybe focus on a different thing, maybe go do some cardio, and then from there, once it recovers, I'll go back to it. What do you do?
I think what you touched on is quite interesting because I recently had an interaction with our mentor or my mentor and coach, and she was telling me about how it's important not to approach everything on a project basis. And that you need to find a workflow and you need to find a sustainable way to schedule things into your day, and and what I take away from that is that when you're working on a project and you're approaching things on a project basis, you're constantly telling yourself that this intensity is temporary. But the problem is, if you approach everything like that, you're constantly telling yourself this intensity is temporary, and you keep pushing and you keep pushing and you keep pushing, and when you're done with one project, you move on to the next. Like you were saying, you get, like for you get bored. But like for instance, if I'm working on the website or something like that, it's a big project, and so I'm pushing on it. But then when it's done, it's like, okay, cool, next we've got an event, project, So I think what's important is to like really look at your workflow, look at your capacity, and realistically think, like, how many hours can I actually do? Schedule everything in terms, like this is what works for me. Schedule everything in. I need to at least get an hour of workout. If not every day, every second day. And I also need to get in a good 6 to 8 hours of work in a day. And then from there, it's like, realistically, when you start scheduling things in, you start to realize, now my problem is that when I look at a task that someone has told me about or said, like for instance, you want something, and I'm thinking, okay, cool, so I need to do this. It'll take me, oh, that's quick. It'll take me 2 hours. But it may take me 2 hours, but in a vacuum, if I have nothing else to do, it'll take me 2 hours and it'll be done today. But alongside everything else that I need to do, including look after myself, it'll actually take 2-3 days. So basically, looking at things in that way is what I'm trying to do. It's a thing that's, it's work. It's always work to change your habits. But it's something that I find is on my mind a lot lately, and I find that it has helped me to flow a little better and slow myself down in my work, and also help me to be consistent with my workouts, but also have my rest in between. So yeah, that's, for me, that's what it is.
It's interesting you say that, because that's actually a part of what I have to do for my recovery as an addict. Is I have to consciously say no. So like, if I'm approaching a situation where I know I'm going to get triggered and potentially relapse, not even just relapse, I have to consciously tell myself no. As much as I want to entertain the theory and entertain the fun of it, if I know that situation might trigger me, or I might go forth into that, and there's even just the slightest hint of danger there for me for relapse, I immediately say no. And I think that might be something that we need to maybe work on, as both of us, is when we see a situation that we know we might overdo it, we might actually need to just say no every time.
Deal with it as an addiction, because psychologically it's pretty much like an addiction. People get addicted to burnout, and this actually, it sparks another thing in the conversation, because I've mentioned before about in a post that we've done on Instagram before about the way that people get addicted to running to the point of complete injury. I mean, I was running with the JPA group, and we would do 20 kilometers, and for me, I was only doing it every Saturday. And it's funny because, joined this group, and I haven't run in years, and I was running 20 kilometers from the get-go. And a lot of these guys were like, how are you doing this? These are seasoned runners. These people have done comrades several times. But half of them are injured chronically, and it's like, okay guys, but you've done no strength training, you've done no cross training, and you just keep running on injuries. And you know, one thing that a study has shown is that when you push yourself to that level, your body's releasing opiates that you can get addicted to. You are burning yourself out because you're addicted to the feeling you get from running, because of your body's inflammatory response to kill the pain that you're causing yourself. And I'm not saying that you should never do comrades, and I'm not saying that you should never run long distance, but at some point you got to ask yourself, am I really doing this because it's good for me, you know? And I understand the difference between what's healthy and what is performance. But at the same time, like, you know, there is also a healthy way to do performance, or a healthier way to do performance. So yeah, and again, relating that back to work as well, and the overlap here for me very clearly is that people martyr themselves against their work. So psychologically there's an addiction, because if I'm burning myself out, I'm proving to myself and my colleagues that I'm working hard. And that is dangerous, because it's like, why do you have to sacrifice your health to prove? Why are you doing that to prove to yourself or to other people that you're working hard? You know, because what you're actually doing is you're reducing your productivity. Because in the long run, the amount of time that you have to take off and your lack of efficiency is actually costing you time, and it's costing you a productivity, instead of, if you put your needs ahead of this feeling that you have to prove to people, then in the long run you're getting so much more done because you don't have any downtime. So that to me is really how this topic kind of makes a lot of sense to me.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned that. So it reminds me of when I look at training athletes. The way that you train a younger athlete is very different to the way you train an older athlete, because their capacity for work when they're younger is slightly higher, and yet older athletes tend to perform better. And the reason why older athletes tend to perform better is because their efficiency is higher. So their efficiency in how much they train, in the type of training they do, in their recovery, and they really do prioritize their recovery. And I find it's actually very similar in work life. So what I'm finding funny is at the moment, if we were to look at like company organizational charts, your exco or higher leadership tend to be your seasoned athletes. And then as you filter down, they tend to be less and less experienced. And so the people down, the people on the lower end of the spectrum tend to burn out more often, because again, they are supposed to have a higher capacity for workload than those at the higher points. But those at the higher points are intended to be more efficient. And so what I find very interesting in today's landscape, and we've seen this now at IAPA, is the overlap at the moment between top and bottom is way too close. And I think that's because we're no longer trying to be more efficient. When people are more efficient, we're reinforcing that with, oh, now you get more work, great. You've got more capacity for work, instead of going
your star player becomes completely overloaded.
100%. Yeah. And I think that that's something that we, as leaders in a country that has a tendency of burning people out, and this includes our star athletes, by the way. If we look at our Springbok rugby team, something I'm loving at the moment is Rassie is really rotating the squad. And it's fantastic because your guys that have very little test cap experience are getting the experience required to actually become seasoned athletes. And your guys that are already seasoned athletes are actually getting the recovery time to consistently be impact players. We got to see Sasha van Ngobazulu got injured recently, and he's had the time to recover. He played as a starter in the one game, but then got subbed off. A lot of people were upset about that because he was playing well up until that point. But then Rassie took him off anyway because he knows that the recovery required is not fully finished. And I think that that's something that we should probably try and enforce when it comes to the workplace and our fitness. figuring out when to be an impact player. Sometimes the reality is we don't have the time to do the groundwork. Sometimes we need to be the star player, pop in, do the impact work, and then pop out. And I think that that's something that a lot of us need to learn to do. Is it's not always just on you. You've got a team around you. Use them and give them the opportunity to shine as well.
Yeah, completely get that. And that's also something, like I said, like I mentioned earlier, is I'm learning to delegate, I'm learning to empower, and that's something that resonates very strongly with me. All right, that's all we have time for today. I think Martin is going to introduce the next topic.
Join us in the next episode to discuss consistency beats intensity, why small wins build big results. Cheers, guys.
Cheers, guys.